Beer is an alcoholic beverage produced by the brewing and fermentation of starches from cereal grain, most commonly malted barley, although wheat, maize, corn, rice, and oats are also used. The grain is mashed to convert starch in the grain to sugars, which dissolve in water to form wort. Fermentation of the wort by yeast produces ethanol and carbonation in the beer. Beer is one of the oldest and most widely consumed alcoholic drinks in the world, and one of the most popular of all drinks. Most modern beer is brewed with hops, which add bitterness and other flavors and act as a natural preservative and stabilizing agent. Other flavoring agents, such as gruit, herbs, or fruits, may be included or used instead of hops. In commercial brewing, natural carbonation is often replaced with forced carbonation. Beer is distributed in bottles and cans, and is commonly available on draft in pubs and bars. The brewing industry is a global business, consisting of several dominant multinational companies and many thousands of smaller producers ranging from brewpubs to regional breweries. The strength of modern beer is usually around 4% to 6% alcohol by volume, ABV. Brewing. The process of making beer is brewing. It converts the grain into a sugary liquid called wort and then ferments this into beer using yeast. The first step, mixing malted barley with hot water in a mash tun, is mashing. The starches are converted to sugars, and the sweet wort is drained off. The grains are washed to extract as much fermentable liquid from the grains as possible. The sweet wort is put into a kettle, or copper, and boiled. Hops are added as a source of bitterness, flavor, and aroma. The longer the hops are boiled, the more bitterness they contribute, but the less hop flavor and aroma remain. The wort is cooled and the yeast is added. The wort is then fermented, often for a week or longer. The yeast settles, leaving the beer clear. During fermentation, most of the carbon dioxide is allowed to escape through a trap. The carbonation is often increased either by transferring the beer to a pressure vessel and introducing pressurized carbon dioxide, or by transferring it before the fermentation is finished so that carbon dioxide pressure builds up inside the container. Ingredients. The basic ingredients of beer are water, a starch source, usually malted barley, a brewer's yeast to produce the fermentation, and a flavoring such as hops. A mixture of starch sources may be used, with a secondary carbohydrate source, such as maize, corn, rice, wheat, or sugar, often termed an adjunct, especially when used alongside malted barley. Less widely used starch sources include millet, sorghum, and cassava root in Africa, potato in Brazil, and agave in Mexico. Water is the main ingredient, accounting for 93% of beer's weight. The level of dissolved bicarbonate influences beer's finished taste. Due to the mineral properties of each region's water, specific areas were originally the sole producers of certain types of beer, each identifiable by regional characteristics. Dublin's hard water is well suited to making stout, such as Guinness, while the Pilsen region's soft water is ideal for brewing Pilsner, such as Pilsner Urquell. The waters of Burton in England contain gypsum, which benefits making pale ale to such a degree that brewers of pale ale add gypsum in a process known as Burtonisation. The starch source provides the fermentable material and determines the strength and flavor of the beer. The most common starch source used in beer is malted grain. Grain is malted by soaking it in water, allowing it to begin germination, and then drying the partially germinated grain in a kiln. Malting produces enzymes that convert starches into fermentable sugars. Different roasting times and temperatures produce different colors of malt from the same grain. Darker malts produce darker beers. Nearly all beers use barley malt for most of the starch, as its fibrous hull remains attached to the grain during threshing. After malting, barley is milled, which finally removes the hull, breaking it into large pieces. These pieces remain with the grain during the mash and act as a filter bed during lautering, when sweet wort is separated from insoluble grain material. Other grains, including wheat, rice, oats, and rye, and less frequently, corn and sorghum may be used. Some brewers have produced gluten-free beer, made with sorghum, for those who cannot consume gluten-containing grains like wheat, barley, and rye. Flavoring beer is the sole commercial use of hops. The flower of the hop vine acts as a flavoring and preservative agent in nearly all beer made today. The flowers themselves are often called hops. The first historical mention of the use of hops in beer dates from 822 AD in monastery rules written by Adelard of Corbie, though widespread cultivation of hops for use in beer began in the 13th century. Before then, beer was flavored with other plants such as grains of paradise or alehoof. Combinations of aromatic herbs, berries, and even wormwood were combined into a flavoring mixture known as gruit. Some beers today, such as Froke by the Scottish Heather Ales Company, use plants other than hops for flavoring, and Cervoise Lancelot by the French brasserie Lancelot Company. Hops contribute a bitterness that balances the sweetness of the malt. The bitterness of beers is measured on the International Bitterness Units scale. Hops further contribute floral, citrus, and herbal aromas and flavors. They have an antibiotic effect that favors the activity of brewer's yeast over less desirable microorganisms, and aids in head retention, the length of time that a foamy head created by carbonation will last. The acidity of hops is a preservative. Yeast is the microorganism responsible for fermenting beer. It metabolizes the sugars, producing ethanol and carbon dioxide, and thereby turns wort into beer. In addition, yeast influences the character and flavor. The dominant types of beer yeast are top fermenting Saccharomyces cerevisiae and bottom fermenting Saccharomyces pastorianus. Brettanomyces ferments lambics and Taru lasperidal bruecii ferments Bavarian Weiss beer. Before the role of yeast in fermentation was understood, fermentation involved wild or airborne yeasts. A few styles, such as lambics, rely on this method today, but most modern fermentation adds pure yeast cultures. Some brewers add clarifying agents or finings to beer, which typically precipitate, collect as a solid, out along with protein solids, and are found only in trace amounts in the finished product. This process makes the beer appear bright and clean, rather than the cloudy appearance of ethnic and older styles such as wheat beers. Clarifying agents include isinglass, from the swim bladders of fish, Irish moss, a seaweed, Kappa carrageenan, from the seaweed Cappaficus cottoni, polychlar, artificial, and gelatin. Beer marc suitable for vegans is clarified either with seaweed or with artificial agents. In the 21st century, larger breweries have repeatedly absorbed smaller breweries. In 2002, South African breweries bought the North American Miller Brewing Company to found SAB Miller, becoming the second largest brewery after North American Anheuser-Busch. In 2004, the Belgian Interbrew was the third largest brewery by volume, and the Brazilian Ambev was the fifth largest. They merged into InBev, becoming the largest brewery. In 2007, SAB Miller surpassed InBev and Anheuser-Busch when it acquired Royal Grolsch, the brewer of Dutch brand Grolsch. In 2008, when InBev, the second largest, bought Anheuser-Busch, the third largest, the new Anheuser-Busch InBev company became again the largest brewer in the world. As of 2020, according to the market research firm Technavio, InBev was the largest brewing company in the world, with Heineken second, CR Snow third, Carlsberg fourth, and Molson Coors fifth. A microbrewery, or craft brewery, produces a limited amount of beer. The maximum amount of beer a brewery can produce and still be classed as a microbrewery varies by region and by authority. In the US, it is 15,000 US beer barrels, 1.8 megaliters, 390,000 imperial gallons, 460,000 US gallons, a year. A brewpub is a type of microbrewery that incorporates a pub or other drinking establishment. The highest density of breweries in the world, most of them microbreweries, exists in Franconia, Germany, especially in the district of Upper Franconia, which has about 200 breweries. The Benedictine Weihenstephan brewery in Bavaria, Germany, can trace its roots to the year 768, as a document from that year refers to a hop garden in the area paying a tithe to the monastery. It claims to be the oldest working brewery in the world. Top fermented beers are most commonly produced with Saccharomyces cerevisiae, a top fermenting yeast which clumps and rises to the surface, typically between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius, 59 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit. At these temperatures, yeast produces significant amounts of esters and other secondary flavor and aroma products, and the result is often a beer with slightly fruity compounds resembling apple, pear, pineapple, banana, plum, or prune, among others. After the introduction of hops into England from Flanders in the 15th century, ale came to mean an unhopped fermented brew, while beer meant a brew with an infusion of hops. The term real ale was coined by the Campaign for Real Ale, CAMRA, in 1973 for beer brewed from traditional ingredients, matured by secondary fermentation in the container from which it is dispensed, and served without the use of extraneous carbon dioxide. It is applied to both bottle-conditioned and cask-conditioned beers. As for the types of top fermented beers, pale ale predominantly uses pale malt. It is one of the world's major beer styles and includes India Pale Ale, IPA. Mild ale has a predominantly malty palate. It is usually dark, with an ABV of 3% to 3.6%. Wheat beer is brewed with a large proportion of wheat, although it often also contains a significant proportion of malted barley. Wheat beers are usually top fermented. Stout is a dark beer made using roasted barley, and typically brewed with slow fermenting yeast. There are a number of variations including dry stout, such as Guinness, sweet stout, and imperial, or Russian, stout. Stout was originally the strongest variety of porter, a dark brown beer popular with the street and river porters of 18th century London. Bottom fermented beers. Lager is cool fermented beer. Pale lagers are the most commonly drunk beers in the world. Many are of the Pilsner type. The name lager comes from the German lagern for to store, as brewers in Bavaria stored beer in cool cellars during the warm summer months, allowing the beers to continue to ferment, and to clear any sediment. Lager yeast is a cool bottom fermenting yeast, Saccharomyces pastorianus. Lager typically undergoes primary fermentation at 7 to 12 degrees Celsius, 45 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, and then a long secondary fermentation at 0 to 4 degrees Celsius, 32 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit, the lagering phase. During the secondary stage, the lager clears and mellows. The cooler conditions inhibit the natural production of esters and other byproducts, resulting in a cleaner tasting beer. With improved modern yeast strains, most lager breweries use only short periods of cold storage, typically no more than 2 weeks. Some traditional lagers are still stored for several months. Lambic, a beer of Belgium, is naturally fermented using wild yeasts, rather than cultivated. Many of these are not strains of brewer's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and may have significant differences in aroma and sourness. Yeast varieties such as Brettanomyces bruxellensis and Brettanomyces lambicus are common in lambics. In addition, other organisms such as lactobacillus bacteria produce acids which contribute to the sourness. Around the world, many traditional and ancient starch-based drinks are classed as beer. In Africa, there are ethnic beers made from sorghum or millet, such as Ashakundu in Namibia and Tella in Ethiopia. Kyrgyzstan also has a beer made from millet. It is a low-alcohol, somewhat porridge-like drink called bozo. Bhutan, Nepal, Tibet, and Sikkim also use millet in chhang, a popular semi-fermented rice/millet drink in the eastern Himalayas. The Andes in South America has chicha, made from germinated maize, corn, while the indigenous peoples in Brazil have caurum, a traditional drink made since pre-Columbian times by chewing manioc so that an enzyme, amylase, present in human saliva can break down the starch into fermentable sugars. This is similar to masato in Peru. Beers made from bread, among the earliest forms of the drink, are sadi in Finland, kvass in Russia and Ukraine, and buza in Sudan. 4,000 years ago fermented bread was used in Mesopotamia. Food waste activists got inspired by these ancient recipes and used leftover bread to replace a third of the malted barley that would otherwise be used for brewing their craft ale. Beer is measured and assessed by color, by strength, and by bitterness. The strength of modern beer is usually around 4% to 6%, measured as alcohol by volume, ABV. The perceived bitterness is measured by the International Bitterness Units Scale, IBU, defined in cooperation between the American Society of Brewing Chemists and the European Brewery Convention. The international scale was a development of the European Bitterness Units Scale, often abbreviated as EBU, and the bitterness values should be identical. Color. Beer color is determined by the malt. The most common color is a pale amber produced from using pale malts. Pale lager and pale ale are terms used for beers made from malt dried and roasted with the fuel coke. Coke was first used for roasting malt in 1642, but it was not until around 1703 that the term pale ale was used. In terms of sales volume, most of today's beer is based on the pale lager brewed in 1842 in the city of Plzeň in the present-day Czech Republic. The modern pale lager is light in color due to use of coke for killing, which gives off heat with little smoke. Dark beers are usually brewed from a pale malt or lager malt base with a small proportion of darker malt added to achieve the desired shade. Other colorants such as caramel are also widely used to darken beers. Very dark beers, such as stout, use dark or patent malts that have been roasted longer. Some have roasted unmalted barley. Strength. Beer ranges from less than 3% alcohol by volume, ABV, to around 14% ABV, though this strength can be increased to around 20% by repitching with champagne yeast and to 55% ABV by the freeze distilling process. The alcohol content of beer varies by local practice or beer style. The pale lagers that most consumers are familiar with fall in the range of 4 to 6%, with a typical ABV of 5%. The customary strength of British ales is quite low, with many session beers being around 4% ABV. In Belgium, some beers, such as table beer, are of such low alcohol content, 1%, 4%, that they are served instead of soft drinks in some schools. The weakest beers are described as alcohol-free, typically containing 0.05% ABV. This compares to low-alcohol beers which may contain 1.2% ABV or less, and conventional beers which average 4.4% ABV. The strength of beers has climbed during the later years of the 20th century. Vetter 33, a 10.5% ABV, 33 degrees Plato, hence Vetter 33, Doppelbock, was listed in the 1994 Guinness Book of World Records as the strongest beer at that time, though Samichlaus, by the Swiss brewer Hurlemann, had also been listed by the Guinness Book of World Records as the strongest at 14% ABV. Since then, some brewers have used champagne yeasts to increase the alcohol content of their beers. Samuel Adams reached 20% ABV with Millennium and then surpassed that amount to 25.6% ABV with Utopias. The strongest beer brewed in Britain was Bazza Super Brew by Parish Brewery, a 23% ABV beer. In September 2011, the Scottish brewery Brewdog produced Ghost Deer, which, at 28%, they claim to be the world's strongest beer produced by fermentation alone. The product claimed to be the strongest beer made is Skorchbrau's 2011 Schorschbach 57 with 57.5% ABV. It was preceded by The End of History, a 55% Belgian ale, made by Brewdog in 2010. The same company had previously made Sink the Bismarck, a 41% ABV IPA Tactical Nuclear Penguin, a 32% ABV Imperial Stout. Each of these beers are made using the Esbach method of fractional freezing, in which a strong ale is partially frozen and the ice is repeatedly removed, until the desired strength is reached, a process that may class the product as spirits rather than beer. The German brewery Skorchbrau's Schorschbach, a 31% ABV Esbach and Hair of the Dog's Dave, a 29% ABV barley wine made in 1994, used the same fractional freezing method. A 60% ABV blend of beer with whiskey was jokingly claimed as the strongest beer by a Dutch brewery in July 2010. Draft, also spelt draft. Beer from a pressurized keg using a lever-style dispenser and a spout is the most common method of dispensing in bars around the world. A metal keg is pressurized with carbon dioxide, CO2, gas which drives the beer to the dispensing tap or faucet. Some beers may be served with a nitrogen/carbon dioxide mixture. Nitrogen produces fine bubbles, resulting in a dense head and a creamy mouthfeel. In the 1980s, Guinness introduced the beer widget, a nitrogen pressurized ball inside a can which creates a moderately dense, tight head. This approximates the effect of serving from a keg, at least for a British-style beer which does not have a specially large head. Cask-conditioned ales, or cask ales, are unfiltered and unpasteurized beers. These beers are termed real ale by the CAMRA organization. When a cask arrives in a pub, it is placed horizontally on a stillage frame, designed to hold it steady and at the right angle, and then allowed to cool to cellar temperature, typically between 11 to 13 degrees Celsius or 52 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, before being tapped and vented. A tap is driven through a rubber bung at the bottom of one end, and a hard spile is used to open a hole in the uppermost side of the cask. The act of still aging and then venting a beer in this manner typically disturbs all the sediment, so it must be left for a suitable period of hours to days to drop, clear, again, as well as to fully condition the beer. At this point the beer is ready to sell, either being pulled through a beer line with a hand pump, or simply being gravity-fed directly into the glass. Draft beer's environmental impact can be 68% lower than bottled beer due to packaging differences. A life cycle study of one beer brand, including grain production, brewing, bottling, distribution and waste management, shows that the CO2 emissions from a 6-pack of microbrew beer is about 3 kilograms, 6.6 pounds. The loss of natural habitat potential from the 6-pack of microbrew beer is estimated to be 2.5 square meters, 26 square feet. Downstream emissions from distribution, retail, storage and disposal of waste can be over 45% of a bottled microbrew beer's CO2 emissions. Where legal, the use of a refillable jug, reusable bottle, or other reusable containers to transport draft beer from a store or a bar, rather than buying pre-bottled beer, can reduce the environmental impact of beer consumption. Packaging. Most beers are cleared of yeast by filtering when packaged in bottles and cans. However, bottle-conditioned beers retain some yeast either by being unfiltered, or by being filtered and then reseeded with fresh yeast. Many beers are sold in cans, though there is considerable variation in the proportion between different countries. In Sweden in 2001, 63.9% of beer was sold in cans. People either drink from the can or pour the beer into a glass. A technology developed by Crown Holdings for the 2010 FIFA World Cup is the full aperture can, so named because the entire lid is removed during the opening process, turning the can into a drinking cup. Cans protect the beer from light, thereby preventing spoilage, and have a seal less prone to leaking over time than bottles. Cans were initially viewed as a technological breakthrough for maintaining the quality of a beer, then became commonly associated with less expensive, mass-produced beers, even though the quality of storage in cans is much like bottles. Plastic, PET, bottles are used by some breweries. The temperature of a beer has an influence on a drinker's experience. Warmer temperatures reveal the range of flavors in a beer, but cooler temperatures are more refreshing. Most drinkers prefer pale lager to be served chilled, a low or medium strength pale ale to be served cool, while a strong barley wine or imperial stout to be served at room temperature. Beer writer Michael Jackson proposed a 5-level scale for serving temperatures: well chilled, 7 degrees Celsius or 45 degrees Fahrenheit, for light beers; pale lagers, chilled, 8 degrees Celsius or 46 degrees Fahrenheit, for Berliner Weiss and other wheat beers; lightly chilled, 9 degrees Celsius or 48 degrees Fahrenheit, for all dark lagers, Altbier and German wheat beers; cellar temperature, 13 degrees Celsius or 55 degrees Fahrenheit, for regular British ale, stout and most Belgian specialties; and room temperature, 15.5 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Fahrenheit, for strong dark ales, especially Trappist beer, and barley wine. Drinking chilled beer began with the development of artificial refrigeration, and by the 1870s, was spread in those countries that concentrated on brewing pale lager. 149 chilling beer makes it more refreshing, though below 15.5 degrees Celsius 60 degrees Fahrenheit the chilling starts to reduce taste awareness and reduces it significantly below 10 degrees Celsius 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Beer served unchanged either cool or at room temperature reveal more of their flavors. Cask Mark, a non-profit UK beer organisation, has set a temperature standard range of 12 degree, 14 degree C, 53 degree, 57 degree F, for cask ales to be served. Beer is consumed out of a variety of vessels, such as a glass, a beer stein, a mug, a pewter tankard, a beer bottle or a can, or at music festivals and some bars and nightclubs, from a plastic cup. The shape of the glass from which beer is consumed can influence the perception of the beer and can define and accent the character of the style. Breweries offer branded glassware intended only for their own beers as a marketing promotion, as this increases sales of their product. The pouring process has an influence on a beer's presentation. The rate of flow from the tap or other serving vessel, tilt of the glass, and position of the pour, in the center or down the side, into the glass all influence the result, such as the size and longevity of the head, lacing, the pattern left by the head as it moves down the glass as the beer is drunk, and the release of carbonation. A beer tower or portable beer tap is sometimes used in bars and restaurants to allow a group of customers to serve themselves. The device consists of a tall container with a cooling mechanism and a beer tap at its base. Beer contains the phenolic acids for hydroxyphenylacetic acid, vanillic acid, caffeic acid, syringic acid, picumaric acid, ferulic acid, and synapic acid. Alkaline hydrolysis experiments show that most of the phenolic acids are present as bound forms and only a small portion can be detected as free compounds. Hops, and beer made with it, contain 8-prenylnaringenin, which is a potent phytoestrogen. Hop also contains myrcene, humulene, xanthahumol, isoxanthahumol, myrcenol, linalool, tannins, and resin. The alcohol 2M2B is a component of hops brewing. Barley, in the form of malt, brings the condensed tannins prodelphinidins B3, B9, and C2 into beer. Tryptophol, tyrosol, and phenylethanol are aromatic higher alcohols, congeners, produced by yeast during the brewing process as secondary products of alcoholic fermentation. Nutrition. Beers vary in their nutritional content. The ingredients used to make beer, including the yeast, provide a rich source of nutrients, therefore beer may contain nutrients including magnesium, selenium, potassium, phosphorus, biotin, chromium, and B vitamins. Beer is sometimes referred to as liquid bread, though beer is not a meal in itself. Health effects. A 2016 systematic review and meta-analysis found that moderate ethanol consumption brought no mortality benefit compared with lifetime abstention from ethanol consumption. Some studies have concluded that drinking small quantities of alcohol, less than 1 drink in women and 2 in men, per day, is associated with a decreased risk of heart disease, stroke, diabetes mellitus, and early death. Some of these studies combined former ethanol drinkers and lifelong abstainers into a single group of non-drinkers, which hides the health benefits of lifelong abstention from ethanol. The long-term health effects of continuous, moderate, or heavy alcohol consumption include the risk of developing alcoholism and alcoholic liver disease. Alcoholism, also known as alcohol use disorder, is a broad term for any drinking of alcohol that results in problems. It was previously divided into 2 types, alcohol abuse and alcohol dependence. In a medical context, alcoholism is said to exist when 2 or more of the following conditions are present: a person drinks large amounts over a long time period, has difficulty cutting down, acquiring and drinking alcohol takes up a great deal of time, alcohol is strongly desired, usage results in not fulfilling responsibilities, usage results in social problems, Usage results in health problems, usage results in risky situations, withdrawal occurs when stopping, and alcohol tolerance has occurred with use. Alcoholism reduces a person's life expectancy by around 10 years, and alcohol use is the third leading cause of early death in the United States. No professional medical association recommends that people who are non-drinkers should start drinking alcoholic beverages. In the United States, a total of 88,000 deaths per year, 5.9% of all deaths, are believed to be due to alcohol. Overeating and lack of muscle tone is the main cause of a beer belly, rather than beer consumption, though a 2004 study found a link between binge drinking and a beer belly. Several diet books quote beer as having an undesirably high glycemic index of 110, the same as maltose. However, the maltose in beer undergoes metabolism by yeast during fermentation, so that beer consists mostly of water, hop oils, and only trace amounts of sugars, including maltose. The multi-step process of beer production is effective at removing pesticide residues from grain. At each step, e.g. mashing or malting, pesticide levels are typically reduced by 50 to 90%, varying with the particular process and pesticide's chemical properties. A 2013 study found that the flavor of beer alone could provoke dopamine activity in the brain of the male participants, who wanted to drink more as a result. The 49 men in the study were subject to positron emission tomography scans, while a computer-controlled device sprayed minute amounts of beer, water, and a sports drink onto their tongues. Compared with the taste of the sports drink, the taste of beer significantly increased the participants' desire to drink. Test results indicated that the flavor of the beer triggered a dopamine release, even though alcohol content in the spray was insufficient for the purpose of becoming intoxicated. Society and culture. Some of the earliest writings mention the production and distribution of beer. The c. 1750 BC Babylonian Code of Hammurabi included laws regulating it, while the hymn to Ninkasi, AC 1800 BC prayer to the Mesopotamian goddess of beer, a recipe for it. In many societies, beer is the most popular alcoholic drink. Various social traditions and activities are associated with beer drinking, such as playing cards, darts, or other pub games, attending beer festivals, engaging in zythology, the study of beer, visiting a series of pubs in one evening, visiting breweries, beer-oriented tourism, or rating beer. Drinking games, such as beer pong, accompany the drinking of beer. Even having a shower beer has developed a following. A relatively new profession is that of the beer sommelier, who informs restaurant patrons about beers and food pairings. Some breweries have developed beers to pair with food. Wine writer Malcolm Gluck disputed the need to pair beer with food, while beer writers Roger Protz and Melissa Cole contested that claim. Beer is considered to be a social lubricant and is consumed in countries all over the world. There are breweries in Middle Eastern countries such as Syria, and in some African countries. Sales of beer are 4 times those of wine, which is the second most popular alcoholic drink. Thank you for watching this video.